Hello, all you happy people. Welcome to Stick to Shorts, a podcast about classical, theatrical, animated shorts. These are the cartoons that ran in movie theaters in the days of classical Hollywood, and I'm on a mission to learn all about them. My name is JD Hansel, and I'm so glad you're here. This season of the podcast is subtitled Building Character. My goal is to learn all about how the American animation industry figured out how to give characters distinct and fully realized personalities. Now, most of that happened in the years when the Disney studio dominated the field in the early sound era, so most of the season will be about that. However, before we get into the sound era, we should spend a couple of episodes in silence. In the silent film era, that is. We're going back to animation's roots. This episode's going to cover an embarrassingly abridged history of animation in the silent era, skimming through things that might be worth a whole episode some other time, but hitting the one really big highlight, this week's featured cartoon short. Then we'll all go forward knowing about the beginnings of animation. Previously on Stick to Shorts, we spent much of the last episode, the Showbiz Bugs episode, talking about vaudeville, the variety theater tradition. It was a showcase of music, comedy, animal acts, magic acts, novelty acts, and more. One such vaudeville act that we didn't get into was chalk talks, when a lecturer would give a presentation and rapidly draw beautiful illustrations on a chalkboard to express their points. This week, we're talking about one vaudeville performer who upped the game by switching out his chalk talk act for a different kind of artistic presentation. Of course, calling him a vaudeville performer doesn't really do justice to him at all. He was primarily an artist in newspaper comics, and in that field, he was widely considered America's greatest cartoonist. He's still regarded as one of the giants in the medium these 100 and some years after his heyday, which may have you asking, who is this remarkable artist? Might it have been Wins or McCay? Wins or McCay? Well, I ask, why not Winsor? Okay, I am so sorry, but you've got to understand. I've had that garbage stuck in my head for like a year for whatever reason, and I just needed to get it out. Joining me for this really necessary trip through Toontown is a highly talented artist who you may know from her Labyrinth prop replicas, her podcast, Bad Princess Movies, her incredible Miss Piggy replica puppet that totally dazzled Adam Savage and me, or her previous appearance on this podcast to talk about Brave Little Tailor. It's Kristi O. Hi, Kristi.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, welcome back. We've got a lot that we can explore with this episode, as I'm breezing through way too much of animation history to actually cover in one episode. I'm kind of doing whatever I have to do to justify getting into the sound era of animation about as quickly as possible. In part because I think that's probably better for the podcast in terms of making people want to listen to it in its early episodes. It's a bit tougher to do a podcast about a silent cartoon, I think, usually, than it is a sound cartoon. But I did want to ask you, Kristi, what are your general thoughts and feelings as an animation enthusiast on these early years of animation, on the silent period? Like, to you, are there any highlights, or does it just not work for you at all? How are you feeling?
I mean, generally, I'll fully admit, and maybe this is the 90s kid in me, where I always wanted my cartoons to be radical with skateboarding and yo-yos and the like that.
Good.
Even when I was getting into learning about the history of animation, I was never really too entranced by the very early silent film period. I mean, part of that might just be that we are so spoiled when it comes to animation nowadays that it can be hard to go back to those early years and understand why they would have captivated audiences, because they seem so almost primitive and simple to us nowadays. But during all that, the one artist that really stood out was Winsor McCay. And the animations that he was doing during the silent film era, comparing him to what other animators were doing, how can you not be marveled by what he was able to produce? It is fascinating what he was able to accomplish. Majority, doing all the work by himself. He did have assistants,
right,
but he was this one-man powerhouse of animation back when people were still trying to even figure out what animation was, and even without knowing that this would go on to be its own genre of media. I guess trying to circle back to your original question, there's not a ton from the silent era that I go back to and revisit, but Winsor McCay is the exception to that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I was watching and also revisiting a good sampling of his animated work for this episode, and also just generally trying to learn a little bit more about him, since so much of his career is in the history of comic strips, which is just not, it's not something that I know, and I feel bad about that. I think I would be more than justified in circling back to McCay and actually giving his career more time where there's more space to just get into all of that. That's probably something for like season 47 of this podcast, where like go back and do how a mosquito operates or Little Nemo or what have you. It's all fascinating to me. It is clearly not my main thing. But I did have this reaction when watching a lot of his work of, by gosh, how did a person do this when there was no one to look to really for, here is how you make a cartoon, here an animated cartoon, here is how this works, here are the principles that you need to know. There's no rule book, there's no other guiding light. McCay is kind of himself the North Star that all the other animators in the early years are looking to. Like the whole New York scene of animation, which is where a lot of this really started before animation moves to Hollywood, it's all people who are looking up to McCay and trying to figure out how to replicate the magic that he created here. Because he did just draw like thousands and thousands upon thousands of drawings with assistance from, what was his assistant's name on this particular? John A. Fitzsimmons, to give credit where credit is due. But it's clearly McCay's project. How he just figured out a lot of the principles of how you make cartoons, even basic things like cycling, like repeating animation, in order to make it possible to make a longer film, basically. It's the stuff that we would associate with Hanna-Barbera cartoons, like the Flintstones, where you see the background repeating over and over and over. He's employing that here to be able to give a character the same movements repeatedly so that the character can really stay alive, in this case, I think, can continue to be moving and look active so that it doesn't look like the character has gone still and died and is just a picture of, just a photograph of a drawing, basically. So yes, when you watch this stuff, you're watching someone figuring out a whole medium that now we do take for granted.
Yes, yeah,
which is the exciting part about it. You're watching something being born, in a way. I will say, circling back to something that you mentioned the last time you were on the show for Brave Little Tailor, you had mentioned in passing, just as an example, the cartoon Bobby Bumps Puts a Beanery on the Bum as an example of the typical silent era fare that you're just not that into. And I will, for the purposes of correcting myself, I had said that was an obscure reference to a Fleischer cartoon. It is not a Fleischer cartoon. It was by the Bray studio, where admittedly the Fleischers did work around the time when that was made, and so they might have worked on that cartoon, but it was not from their studio. Yeah, even that I could get flagged for, because I don't know if they were there at the exact time when that cartoon... In any case, I watched that cartoon a few days ago, and I will just say I found it very funny. And but it's also so simple and crude compared to Gertie the Dinosaur, which is this very ambitious project in a more realistic kind of animation, with a believable character, with, again, simplified but a still halfway realistic background in terms of trying to give you a whole space and really multiple characters that are drawn out in detail such that they seem not real, but also kind of real. Like something has been brought to life here that in a way you believe in.
Exactly.
And that is laying the groundwork for everything that the Disney studio was going to try to do many years later. So let's just jump in and kind of briefly go through like the early years of animation. The word animation, as some of you listeners might know, does not simply mean creating movement. When you go back to its Latin roots, it means imbuing something with life or instilling life. Creating beings that feel like they're really alive has always been the aim of animation, and we see this even in its prehistory, which arguably dates back about as far as humanity itself. As Leonard Maltin wrote in his book Of Mice and Magic, A History of Animated Cartoons, creating the illusion of movement through animated drawings predated the motion picture by many years. Sequential drawings were made by cavemen, and numbered illustrations traced the development of many later civilizations. End quote. Now, when I read that, it sounded kind of familiar to me because it reminded me of the Walt Disney Anthology episode, The Story of the Animated Drawing, which very similarly goes back to the caves, and sort of like the Disney studio has created animation of these cave drawings that he's basically positing that what they were trying to do was animated cartoons.
It begins in prehistoric times with the artistic efforts of our first shaggy ancestors, the cavemen. Here's a reproduction of a wall painting found in the famous caves of Lascaux in France. Apparently, the caveman artist was trying to depict an animal in action the only way he knew how, by drawing it in a running position. At the same time, give or take a few thousand years, in a cave near Altamira in northern Spain, another artist was at work. Note the double pair of legs. Now, if he had been able to alternate these leg positions, as we can with our camera, he would have achieved the miracle of animation.
It's a very impressive and useful look at the history of animation, and is also sort of advertising a book that the Disney studio had made at the time that was an explainer of what animation's deal was in terms of its history and how it worked, which was highly unusual. There was not a lot of other material about that, and so Leonard Maltin ate that stuff up and has recommended that book. This isn't me saying that there's anything wrong with Maltin's point by any means. I'm not being critical of Maltin, really, or even necessarily of the Disney studio. I actually think it's a very useful episode. You can find it on Disney Plus, just as a standalone thing. If you search for The Story of the Animated Drawing, it touches on McCay, Bray, Fleischer. Like it's not just, it's a little Disney centric, but it's not just Disney by any means. But I do feel like it kind of exemplifies this very, very Walt Disney approach to talking about the topic, to say, like, since the dawn of time, mankind has been attempting to do one thing, create Mickey Mouse, and I did it. It was all leading up to what we at this studio, with our talented artists and craftsmen and engineers, have accomplished. So I raise an eyebrow at this. But yeah, there is something to be said for the fact that the sorts of things that animation has been after have just always been part of how humans worked. Really, I think the trick is to look at puppetry and to just try to, like, if you erase the imaginary distinction between animation and puppetry that we have arbitrarily tried to make, despite the gray area of stop motion, which is both, and animatronics, which is both, and films that use shadow puppetry that are kind of considered animated, like the lines there are actually very blurry, and what it means to puppeteer something is, in fact, to animate it, to instill it with life. If you take that away, then yeah, we've been doing animation forever. There are plenty of precursors to animation as we know it, but the most direct ones were flipbooks and zoetropes. You probably have a good understanding of what I mean by flipbook just from its name. But a zoetrope was a wide cylinder shape that you would spin, and when you look inside from the little slits cut into the sides, the rapid succession of images, basically. Just you're getting one image, then another really fast. It would create the illusion of movement, or rather, your brain would create the illusion of movement. So both of these innovations were seen just as novelty toys, not the basis for an art form. And yet, as Maltin writes, the zoetrope was the direct forerunner of the motion picture, and the men who created drawings for it were in fact the first animators. So what I hope is already clear is the interconnectedness of the emergence of animation and the emergence of cinema. You can argue that live-action movies are an offshoot of animation, or that the two media emerged together from the same zoetropic primordial soup. But what you can't successfully argue is that the movies came first and then animation appeared as a variant. That's just simply not, you can't make an argument for that one. And yet I think that the rest of animation history would make it appear as though that were the case. Right? Like, I think that we've been thinking about this kind of backwards in as much as our general culture has been thinking about it at all. Animation kind of leads the way in everything that cinema is doing, both in spirit and in terms of the technology and principles of how the brain interprets vision, basically. Is any of that interesting for someone who subscribed to this podcast for like Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse or whatever? Is that working?
On.
Like, I hope that works.
Yeah.
I hope there's something there. Kristi, you had asked me a really interesting question a few weeks ago that I think it's time to circle back to. You asked what I was taught was the first animated cartoon. Can you say more about like why did that question come to mind for you?
So J. Stuart Blackton, Humorous Phases of a Funny Face, that was the one that I always saw cited as, or, considered to be the first animation. But the last time I watched it, all I could really think of, and I guess this kind of ties into what you said earlier regarding like puppetry and stop motion animation, is, this isn't a fully animated film. It has sequences of that stop motion and puppeting little paper cutouts instead of just being a fully animated. So I was curious if they're like, if you were to rule out Humorous Phases of a Funny Face for that alone, what would be the film that was entirely fully hand-drawn animated?
Okay. Well, I didn't realize that was the question, because I do think I'm rapidly looking through through the book now. Humorous Phases of Funny Faces does get to be canonically first, I think, because you do see the hand come and draw these pictures with the chalk. And so at least some of this seems to be actual drawings. And somehow they do make the drawings move through a process that I think was using basically animation as we know it. For me, I thought that the question was more so what comes before this, because they're just Googling that. Like, I think I did just Google, okay, fine, so what's the first animated film? And other things would come up for many years earlier than this. That film is from 1906. And a few people could point to examples from the 1800s, but then it would be something that's not really using the same mechanical process as film. It would have a totally different kind of projection process, a different way of moving the images. And I think we don't really think of something as animation until it stops being a zoetrope situation and is using the process of a film projector or something like that, or something in its tradition. Until it's film, we don't normally think of it as animation. Once you go to the other side of that, the way that the history of animation, I think, was taught to me in the class that I took years ago, from my memory, the way that I see it approached here, I don't remember how far I got through reading Michael Barrier's book, Hollywood Cartoons, but I did start reading that in preparation for this episode. One really gets the sense that the history of early animated films is humorous phases of funny faces, blah, 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 Gertie the Dinosaur. Like, you just kind of skip right ahead because nobody else wanted to deal with the labor of this. Like, there's other stuff that happens, right? Emile Cole is a French filmmaker who was also a cartoonist like McCay, who is doing simple experiments in this with basically like stick figure animation, but is still coming up with a lot of imaginative ideas. And if this were not a Hollywood Cartoons podcast, I could spend more time on that. Talk about how actually, well, they're really imaginative and creative and pioneering in the medium. However, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, the podcast is specific enough that I don't really have to spend much time with the stuff that Emile Cole was doing, but he was another pioneer from those early years. And it really, I think, is Cole, J. Stuart Blackton, John Randolph Bray is getting into this around 1910 and quickly starts taking credit for just about all of the early developments in animated cartoons. Did that come up for you as well? What you were seeing?
his history specifically with Winsor McCay and
Yeah.
his underhandedness with at one point he apparently posed as a reporter and went to interview McCay. And
What?
yeah,
Oh, I didn't see this
and
part.
yeah. He went to interview McCay, I believe it was in regards to Gertie, and McCay was, happy to share his processes and
Oh, right.
techniques.
I think I did see this. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
I forgot about
And then
this.
and then Bray went and patented McCay's techniques and then tried to sue him, which is like audacity on top of audacity.
Yeah,
I
Bray is such a wild character because like on top of all of that, like all of that is super scummy, like like awful. He then produces his own version of Gertie the Dinosaur
Yes.
that he tries to sell as Gertie, and I've seen it widely circulate. Like in the last episode of this podcast, I was talking about vaudeville for most of the episode. Some might say for too long, in fact. And I kept going back to as sort of my main source, as I wasn't finding any books at the library on vaudeville or even just on American theater generally that had a good focus on vaudeville. I kept going back to a PBS documentary about the history of vaudeville, which by and large I thought was really good. And then when it gets to the end, it sort of casually mentions, oh, and, Winsor McCay made Gertie the Dinosaur for a vaudeville act. And it shows Bray's Gertie the Dinosaur.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Like his forgery got people into, I want to say the 90s is when that documentary was made.
Wow.
Yeah. It kept tricking people. But so like you have on the one hand my feelings about Bray as someone who's just a thief, but also it does seem like he kept coming up with actual innovations at his studio that made animating cartoons a lot more possible. I can't remember if we just said this or not. But when you're watching Gertie the Dinosaur, for each and every image in that animation, the background has been redrawn.
Yes.
Or at least it traced by his assistant, right? Like it had to be redone every single time because no one had figured out how to separate the character from the background. And Bray, to his credit, seems like he was making some significant advancements in that direction and then patented the process. And a lot of times it's patents for stuff that's not even real technological ideas in my mind. Like it's not inventions. I'd get it if he was coming up with inventions to solve problems and then patenting it. He just had ideas for, well, it would be useful to use this sort of material and those ideas were good enough for patents. Years later, when Disney's making their cartoons in the 30s, they're still having to pay the rights to Bray to use those same ideas. He's also the guy who hired on the Fleischers and Walter Lantz and all of these really important animators who would build careers on what they learned at the Bray studio. So I guess he's actually genuinely really important. Like he's oddly this sort of he's a real pioneer who has to be acknowledged for how he was moving the medium forward, and also he pretended to be much more of a pioneer than he was in ways that are really dishonest and would make you think he was just a con man. Those somehow both exist. They're both true.
I want to give credit to, I believe it's Earl Hurd.
Yeah, that's another name that came up.
So he did work with Bray, and he was actually behind the Bobby Bump series of cartoons. But he is the one that I've often seen credited with the invention of the celluloid sheets for animation.
Yeah, Bray was definitely moving in this direction, but you're right that it was Hurd who figured out celluloid was the key. So we don't have to give Bray too much credit, right? We can just give credit to Winsor McCay and Hurd and Emil Cole and J. Stuart Blackton and then call it a day.
Let's do it.
There we go.
Maybe it might help to say that at least what I have read on Wikipedia, to give credit to them, is it seems like McCay apparently countersued Bray and was able to receive royalty payments for him, trying to steal his processes.
Good for Winsor McCay. Let's talk about Winsor McCay. for a bit, just to set the stage. It is still the case that the listeners still probably have no idea what this cartoon is or why it's important if they've just been following along with the show in order. I also feel the need to... Do I clarify this now? I clarified it at the end of the last episode, but I'll say it right here. We don't really have a way to watch the cartoon Gertie the Dinosaur the way that it was meant to be seen. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really exist in that form. And so if you've gone looking for it, then you've probably found various copies on YouTube, some of which might be Bray's forgery, and some of which might be varying lengths of the same film that is mostly not a cartoon, mostly live action, and has a little bit of animation near the end. And that is Gertie the Dinosaur, sort of. Like, that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be going through that whole thing. But really, it is that animation itself near the end that was originally a vaudeville act. It was presented on the vaudeville stage as a companion piece with another film that McCay made that we'll talk about. And if you want to get sort of a recreation of what that original presentation was like, that you will find in The Story of the Animated Drawing, which is the episode of the Walt Disney Anthology series that I mentioned before. That's up on Disney Plus, and on some of the Walt Disney Treasures DVDs, might be a bonus feature on some other titles. So if you have a robust Disney library, check and see if you have The Story of the Animated Drawing. And they do a little recreation of at least part of Gertie the Dinosaur and what it was like to see that on stage the way that it was meant to be seen. Mm-hmm. And I think it goes without saying, given the fact that we're covering it here and now, it's seen as a very pivotal cartoon, where one of the things that Maltin talked about, either in the book or in a podcast episode of his I listened to, is that a lot of people mistakenly refer to Gertie the Dinosaur as the first animated cartoon. Mm. And it's very much not, but what Maltin said that I think is really clever is, in a way, it might as well have been because of just how significant it was.
Yeah.
At making everyone kind of turn and pay attention and go, oh, wait, this is maybe a medium. This is actually something interesting that I might want to do. Walter Lantz was in the audience for either the vaudeville show or the short film version. And it was really seeing Gertie that made him go, oh, I want to get into whatever this is. I want to be an animator, whatever that is. Hmm. And then he would go on to create Woody Woodpecker and Andy Panda and all that stuff. So, who was Winsor McCay? Winsor McCay, born in 1869, or maybe 1871, or maybe 1867. Nobody actually knows when he was born, only that he probably was. He was the artist behind the popular newspaper strip Dreams of a Rarebit Fiend, and its spin-off, Little Nemo in Slumberland. Already I'm kind of lost, I will say. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I should not be the one hosting this podcast. But Dreams of a Rarebit Fiend is, I guess you could call it an anthology series, in that each time, instead of focusing on following one specific character, it's, here's just a new idea for a comic that's sort of, it's dreamlike, basically. You're seeing somebody's dream, and at the end somebody wakes up and is like, oh, I guess I shouldn't have eaten that rarebit before bed. And that seems to be the whole idea. That's it. And it just became overwhelmingly popular. Widely syndicated, and is why William Randolph Hearst, one of the great villains of American history, hired him on to do newspaper strips for his paper. So you get this spin-off of Dreams of a Rarebit Fiend called Little Nemo in Slumberland that takes the same idea but focuses on one specific boy who had popped up in Dreams of a Rarebit Fiend, Little Nemo. We focus on Nemo's dreams, in which he goes into various surreal fantasy worlds, Slumberland, I guess, and meets up with his friends. So you've got a small cast of recurring characters. This was just overwhelmingly popular. It was just a wildly popular series that still people look to and go, by gosh, that is art. This is a newspaper strip, so it had to be, in theory, cranked out quickly. And yet you look at this compared to any other newspaper strips from any time period, and it's like, all of this should be framed in art galleries. It's like highly detailed, super precise, balances a sense of realism with a strong, bold sense of style. We've got it largely in color. That's the thing that I think surprised me, is how much of this we still have in beautiful colors. It's just a really striking strip. Do you have any thoughts or feelings on the work of Winsor McCay?
I mean, looking at his comic illustrations, it feels like a natural fit that he ended up going into animation, because a lot of his comic strips, as you're looking at it, it naturally starts to feel like a storyboard or an animatic. Like, he just has this great sense of movement. Anyone out there, if the Little Nemo Ventures in Slumberland, if that does not sound familiar, guaranteed you have probably seen the panels of it, because they are extremely iconic. I think the shots of Nemo and his bed, and the bedposts or the bed legs become long and skinny and start walking
around. Yeah.
That's probably the visual that gets referenced the most. And that comes from Winsor McCay.
And he was experimenting with the comic form as he went along. You'd get some fourth wall breaks. He would be playing with like the sizes of the panels to make certain ones bigger for emphasis, and has a graphic sense to how the panels are shaped and presented, so that you can get a whole piece across different panels that feels like one art piece, where every panel is working together. And so you've got these two different media, comic strips and animated cartoons, in which everybody's looking up to McCay. Apparently it was McCay's son who had a flip book that really inspired McCay to try to make some sort of films of moving drawings. And what he started with was a bit simpler and more straightforward than what he ended up with. He starts with just the idea of, let's make drawings move. That's it. Like, simple idea. And so he does a cartoon short, Little Nemo, that is, again, it's to be presented as part of a vaudeville act, where he's going to go out on stage, and as his trick, basically, his little show is, I'm Winsor McCay, I made Little Nemo. It's your favorite comic. Everybody loves it. And now watch as my drawing of the characters from Little Nemo come to life. And you literally have one of the characters have just a little speech bubble that says, watch me move. And then you watch them move. And a lot of it's pretty simple. And then Nemo starts moving his arms up and down like he's conducting the movement of the other characters, and the characters on either side of him start stretching up and down like a funhouse mirror.
Yes.
Like, I don't mean just that as a vague description. I mean very precisely he replicates the look of stretching and squashing, not in the way that those would be used as animation techniques later, but in the way that if you were to stand in front of a funhouse mirror, you would see your body move. And it's...
Yeah. And I would hazard a guess that that's probably exactly what McCay did. And there's moments in Gertie as well where you really get a sense that he must have studied some real life examples of these movements or animals, and was able to instill that into his animations. And it is phenomenal. It is so... I wish that everybody who listened to your podcast could attempt to animate, because sometimes it is hard to understand how impressive someone like Winsor McCay is until you are someone trying to animate and trying to make this dang person just lift their arm, just go from point A to point B and have that look good. And you think it sounds simple until you're the one trying to make it happen. And oh my goodness, it is not easy. And I can only imagine there were probably so many people, so many artists in the audience watching Winsor McCay show off his work, and probably this equal parts mix of utter astonishment and also deep-seated jealousy. Oh my God, how is this man able to do this?
And the answer is thousands and thousands of drawings, which is wild.
Yes.
But somehow that's the answer, which I think only someone who was working in newspaper comics at that time would be able to do, in terms of someone being used to, I have to get 1 million drawings done by the end of this week.
Yes, yeah.
That's the job.
That's also the infuriating thing, is not only is he a brilliant illustrator and animator, but he's fast too. That's not fair.
Yeah. Yes, well, here's the thing. The beauty for me of doing a podcast about cartoons as opposed to puppetry, where I have enough experience to know exactly how that works, is I can approach this without any jealousy, because it's like I don't have a horse in that race. Yeah. I'm just not a part of this world at all that I'm studying, which makes me, again, it comes with some trepidation. But also, I know just enough to understand how incredibly impressive it is. And it kind of boggles the mind what he was able to accomplish, again, without anyone to really look to, because it's not even clear that he necessarily saw anything by Emile Cole, for example. We don't know. That was in France. I mean, film was more international at the time during the silent era, because there was no reason why, if it's silent, why movies couldn't be moved all around the world. And so they were. Nevertheless, we still don't know that he saw the films of Emile Cole. I should say, though, McCay didn't make this happen with just raw talent and experience. The real reason why he was able to do this is the process he came up with for organizing the labor of animating. So intuitively, when you imagine hand-drawn animation, you picture someone drawing the first picture for the first frame, and then drawing the next one, and then the next one, which is sometimes how it works. That approach is called straight ahead. Sometimes straight-ahead action. McCay came up with what he called the split system, but would ultimately take on the name pose-to-pose. Straight-ahead action versus pose-to-pose is one of the 12 principles of animation. Animating straight ahead yields unpredictable results, so it's useful when an animator wants a wild spontaneity. But for greater control and predictability, you need pose-to-pose. In pose-to-pose animation, you start by figuring out what the really important drawings are in the scene, the key poses, and where they need to go timing-wise, which gives you the skeleton of the scene. Then you, or your assistant, draw the poses in between, which, fittingly, are known as in-betweens. If I understand it right, you can keep splitting the difference all you want. If you're starting by drawing frames 1 and 9, you can split the difference and draw frame 5. Now you've got a better sense of what the movement between the two key poses looks like, and so you can move on to frames 3 and 7. Now you've got all the odd numbers done, and you can really tell what the movement looks like. Then, assuming for the purposes of this example that you're animating on the ones, that is, each frame gets its own drawing, you fill in the rest. Ultimately, this would enable animators later in the early sound era to carefully control their characters' movements so the performances would be more convincing. But it started as a way to make animation easier. Naturally, it makes it easier to divide up the labor to give some of it to other people. McCay chose not to patent the process, but from what I can tell, he first put it into practice in the making of Gertie, a film that we will talk about someday in this episode of the podcast.
Listen, it took you and Tori like an hour to get to that Tom and Jerry cartoon.
And you know what? It was worth it. I'm pretty happy with that episode.
Yeah.
I like it. And that, what I'm describing now, is basically standard practice. And even if someone was doing just computer animation for a Pixar movie or what have you, they're using keyframes. It's still all the same ideas that McCay is figuring out in this period. I'm getting a big smile on my face talking about this moment when it all comes together, where everything that I like becomes suddenly possible out of nothing.
No, I know, absolutely. And this is the magic, because like we can talk about key poses and in-betweens, and it's all like so very like, yes, of course that's what you do. Of course that's what you do. But this is the stuff that Winsor McCay is figuring out by himself for his animations, as being the pioneer of this technique that we all now know inherently this is how you animate.
Well, you and I know that.
Yes.
I know that, but I actually think that most people don't have a clearer sense than they did in 1914 of how animation works. Though it has to be a little bit better, because you talked about what must people have been thinking when they saw the Little Nemo film. It turns out people thought it was some sort of trick and he didn't actually draw this stuff.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to tell how much of that was skepticism, like no one would go through the trouble of drawing all this, and how much of that was they truly just didn't know that drawings could do that and couldn't imagine the process that he does explicitly describe a little bit in the film version of Little Nemo, and even more so and more precisely in Gertie. People thought there was some sort of trick with wires going on, that it was some sort of puppetry trick or something. They didn't get it. And so what he does for these next couple of films with How a Mosquito Operates and Gertie the Dinosaur is make something that can't really be anything other than drawings. It doesn't make sense as anything other than cartoons. Certainly can't be photographed, because one might think that he just took pictures of people in elaborate costumes as the Little Nemo characters and traced over them. That doesn't really work, I don't think, for how those characters are shaped, but someone who didn't know any better might suppose that. With these two films, particularly with Gertie, you don't have photos of a dinosaur, and that's the point. That's the beauty of it. So How a Mosquito Operates is mostly that, where you have this way oversized mosquito, who I find very unpleasant, I dislike him very much, who shows you how he works. And like for a while, he's pretty much the size of a dog, and then he's more so the size of a bird. There's so little sense of scale and perspective or any of the things that we now take for granted. It's just, you understand that this looks like a mosquito, and he's got a little hat on, and he's tipping his hat for you, the audience. He understands that he's part of a vaudeville act, sort of as a trained animal act in a way. Like it's a trick act. It's sort of a magic trick act, but it's also sort of a trained animal act, and also its own kind of act that McCay is presenting. Definitely a novelty act. He just kind of shows you what he does, the mosquito, and is very much performing for you, the audience, as he is jabbing his giant needle nose into a man, going far too deep with far too large
it's not fun to watch.
It's so unpleasant. It's such an unpleasant film. Like, we're praising Winsor McCay. Oh, the beauty of his work. And then you put on How a Mosquito Operates, and it's like, no, all of this is wrong. What are you doing? This is disgusting. I can't look. It's like you've just taken a butter knife and dropped it into a man's forehead. What? But then he like, just the mosquito gets bigger and bigger and is so proud of himself until finally, of course, he explodes. Fortunately, it's in black and white, so there's no sense of blood going everywhere, but that is the implication. I'm glad he went in a much cuter direction for his next film, which is Gertie the Dinosaur, 1914, which he sort of attaches onto the same vaudeville act of showing you just how cool it is that he can make cartoons move. That really is still his trick, but it's becoming a more sophisticated trick where more and more you feel like the characters themselves are in on the performance of it. There's more of a sense that they have a kind of cognition and personality, and that really is going to come together in Gertie, which I think means it's time to talk about it. Dare I say? I think we're so. Here. Okay.
I mean, if we wanted to, I'm sure we could do. We could keep going for another hour or two, just talking about the lead up.
I'd say I'm about out of material. So this week's trip through Toontown takes us to 1914. The studio is, well, the medium hasn't really gotten settled into a studio system yet, but we'll say the studio is just Winsor McCay. The director is Winsor McCay, and the cartoon is Gertie the Dinosaur.
Winsor McCay, the famous newspaper cartoonist, made several noteworthy experiments with animation. Among them was his film, Gertie the Dinosaur. Gertie was not presented in the way modern films are shown today. It was part of a vaudeville act in which Winsor McCay appeared on the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Gertie the Dinosaur. I will speak to Gertie, and she will do everything that I ask her to.
So you just heard Walt Disney introducing the recreation that he and his team did of the vaudeville act. So then there's the question of what do I actually describe for the purposes of this, since normally I would put a synopsis right here.
Oh, yeah.
I think what we're going to talk about primarily is the whole 12 to 14 minute full film version of this with all the live action components. So basically, to sum it up, Winsor McCay has a bet with another cartoonist that he can bring a dinosaur to life, and then presents his film Gertie the Dinosaur, which is notably a highly interactive piece in which he gives commands to the dinosaur, and then sometimes the dinosaur obeys, sometimes not. And in either case, you do kind of get the sense that he has managed to bring dinosaurs back to life. And that's really about it. There's something poetically perfect about the film that is a precursor to cartoons as we know them, being a rebirth of prehistoric life. Like, this medium's new beginning is also a new beginning for an extinct species from the dawn of time. Not really from the beginning of life on Earth, of course, but like the earliest animal that feels both specific to prehistory and generally well known. It's the dinosaurs. Like, it kind of captures the spirit of beginnings or even pre-beginnings. I don't think McCay necessarily knew that that's what he was doing. I don't think that was his ambition here, and yet it ends up being like this perfect start to the story of animation. You can kind of just start with dinosaurs, and it's like, yeah, that feels about right.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen the promotional poster for this by any chance, or any version of it? There are a couple of different ones.
Probably, but I think you need to refresh my memory.
So I've got a couple here. I think this original advertisement is for the vaudeville show specifically. I think it says Winsor McCay, in parentheses, by permission of the Hearst newspapers. Mm-hmm. Creator of Little Nemo, Dreams of a Rarebit Fiend, and other newspaper cartoons. And his wonderful trained dinosaurus, Gertie. She's a scream. She eats, drinks, and breathes. She laughs and cries, dances the tango, answers questions, and obeys every command. Yet she lived millions of years before man inhabited this earth and has never been seen since? According to science, this monster once ruled this planet. Skeletons now being unearthed measuring from 90 feet to 160 feet in length. An elephant should be a mouse beside Gertie. The greatest animal act in the world! 3 exclamation points. So that's about as good of a synopsis as anybody can give you. But what I really appreciate is the poster for the filmed version. So it says, Winsor McCay's Gertie, wonderfully trained dinosaurus. And it looks like this was maybe originally released just with the title Gertie, and then took on the full title Gertie the Dinosaur over time. It says, released through Box Office Attraction Company. Signed William Fox, president. And there are cars in the advertisement here, such that, like, you see cars driving by and on top of Gertie's head. This is something that's not in the film at all. This is not in the animation, but on top of Gertie's head is a car full of people. Now, there is a car, like, a car is prominently featured at the beginning of the film, but not in the animation. It has nothing to do with Gertie. And at the bottom, I mention all this because at the bottom there is text that says, Gertie just loves an auto. I think this got some money from the emerging automotive industry. And that's why the film has to start with them driving, and why there are cars all over the poster, and why Gertie just loves auto. I also want to point out there is a stamp in the corner of this poster for an Acme company. I kid you not. Some sort of Acme corporation. So, like, I guess release Gertie versus Acme?
I love the idea that Gertie the Dinosaur might be an example of early product placement in film.
Oh, I'm sure. We open with a title card reading, Winsor McCay, America's greatest cartoonist, and Gertie, released through the Box Office Attraction Company. Establishing shot, the Museum of Natural History, New York City. Cars drive by this massively wide building as workers do something under a strange dark archway with what appears to be a tarp. This will have no bearing on what follows, so please ignore me. A card reads, Winsor McCay, creator of Little Nemo and Dreams of a Rarebit Fiend. George McManus, creator of The Newlyweds, Bringing Up Father, and Let George Do It. Roy McCardell, humorist, and others on a joyride. It does circle and underline certain real people who are playing themselves here alongside Winsor McCay, who's playing himself in this film. I should say the reason why this film exists the way that it does, or I guess exists at all, is McCay was pretty content to just keep, using the vaudeville circuit to showcase this. William Randolph Hearst was not super happy about the fact that Winsor McCay was spending all of his time doing vaudeville performances instead of spending all of his time making more newspaper comics. And so eventually he had to make the film as a way to keep Gertie circulating without having to perform it over and over again. And so what we get is a film that is like really different from the act, and I would argue doesn't make a ton of sense.
No.
But is a fascinating thing that adds this framing device that is also in the framing device for Little Nemo. This idea of a bunch of cartoonists are hanging out together and one is going to make a bet with Winsor McCay about what he can or cannot do through the magic of the craft of cartooning. Woohoo. And so one of these people is George McManus. The Newlyweds was the first comic strip centered around the American family, from what I was seeing, if I understood that right, or maybe the first American comic strip centered around the family, something along those lines. And then Bringing Up Father was his successful, I think a follow-up to that, or just the other thing that he's really known for, which was successful enough that he kept producing it into the 1950s. Like that seems like it was a newspaper staple.
That's pretty impressive.
And then Roy McCardell, who's just kind of, it just gets called a humorist here and nothing more. It seems like he was a journalist whose career led him all over the place, so it's not really easy to distill that any more than they did here. But I will tell you that he might have been the first person hired by a movie production company when he was hired as a writer for American Mutoscope and Biograph Company in the year 1900.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's got some significant people in this auto, which we know Gertie loves. And they're driving along and passing by the museum when they come to an unexpected stop. The driver and the gentleman sitting up front step out to see what's wrong. "We've got a puncture," the gentleman says. "Let's go into the museum while he fixes it." In the museum, we see a dinosaur skeleton, and a title underneath tells us 70 feet in length, 20 feet in height. That's about 21 meters long and 6 meters high. As the gentlemen behold this remarkable sight, Winsor McCay bets George McManus a dinner for the party that he can make the dinosaurs live again by a series of hand-drawn cartoons. They all look very amused by this, so we can presume the bet is on. After 6 months' work, McCay finishes drawing the cartoons. In my document, there's a blue line under month's work because there's no apostrophe on the title card. That's on them. Got him with grammar, folks. My first criticism of the film, I guess. That's probably all going to get edited out. Anyway, we see Winsor McCay in a house that is as silent movie-ish as they come, with walls adorned with ovals containing unidentifiable images, along with one bust. You love to see it, those silent movie-ish houses. The window is open to let in the light of the dark gray void outside. McCay's desk has stacks of paper half a meter high from his months of drawing. He refills his pen and writes or draws something at the bottom of an image from the cartoon, holding the previous image next to it for reference. So you're really starting to get, you can kind of get a sense just from looking at this of more or less what he's doing here, which is drawing a lot of pictures and comparing them to make sure that one follows another in a way that continues the movement.
Yeah, it's almost a way so that the audience gets some insight into how was this made, like further trying to prove that Gertie, this wasn't just tracing photographs, this was a series of many drawings put together to form movement.
Yep. McManus calls while the cartoons are being photographed. I gotta pick a consistent voice for these title cards. McManus walks in and shakes hands with McCay. One of McCay's assistants walks up a small staircase into the dark gray void. McCay holds up his hands and says, "I made 10,000 cartoons, each one a little bit different from the one preceding it." You know, they say most magic tricks boil down to putting more time and effort into something than the audience believes any person would be willing to do. That's how you make any magic trick work. This is that. He calls for his assistant, specifically his assistant with a fun hat, to bring Mr. McManus some of the drawings. And in the other room, he grabs a reasonable number of drawings to carry, but the other assistants pile up the drawings until he can't see. He trips on the stairs and the drawings fall all around McCay and McManus.
And he proceeds to start picking them up. and he is stepping on them as he's picking them up. And I'm so grateful that this is all just made up story for the framing device, because the idea of someone actually trampling those individual frames of animation is utterly horrifying to me.
Yeah, it's a good thing that absolutely everything made in the silent era of film has been carefully preserved, so we have all of it now. That's good. Sorry, I didn't mean for that to... That may have sounded like a harsh criticism of your point. It was not. I hear you. You are absolutely right. I like that McCay takes some of the drawings to show McManus, but before he really gets into explaining anything, he just throws them on the floor for his assistant to pick up.
Yeah.
We now enter a portion of the film called The Dinner. The gentlemen are being served at a fancy dining table in a room with columns and stained glass windows, but something is out of place. A white screen that looks like a giant sheet of paper. I think we're supposed to understand it as maybe a screen that has been covered by a sheet of paper, but maybe it's more so just a drawing pad of the sort that you'd see in his stage acts. I think you see a drawing pad like this in Little Nemo. It's kind of nebulous. So this still doesn't totally make sense no matter how you look at it, as a screen, as a drawing pad, whatever. It doesn't really make sense given what happens later when his drawing springs to life. And I think it's worth taking a moment to highlight the oddity of the screen. It's amazing to me that this whole film really revolves around this one object that feels like it doesn't belong in this room at all, and yet it's never satisfactorily explained or even defined. Maybe this would have seemed ordinary to audiences who were used to chalk talks, but I suspect this screen is kind of meant to defy categorization. It's somewhere between a sketch pad for drawing and a projected film, which perfectly captures what Gertie represents, a moment of transition when the old art of drawing and the new art of cinema meet in a nebulous in-between space. I also think it's worth noting that the film makes a point of showing you the basics of how animation is made. Like, it starts to give you a logical explanation that we just saw of how Gertie was created, but then it surprises you by still somehow presenting a magical fantasy about McCay's drawings coming to life. Mm-hmm. In theory, it is showing you, and here's how the magic trick works, but then it does kind of negate its own reality a little bit, and I like that fantastical quality to it. I think that keeps people just kind of even more, like, you get to be dazzled by McCay as someone who put a ton of work into this, and also as someone who seems to just have magic powers at the same time. Those kind of exist together in a way that reminds me of what Walt Disney was doing decades later on his TV show, where he'll show you exactly how a cartoon is made, and then Tinkerbell shows up in the room with him, and he has a conversation with her. Like, reality is all being blurred here, such that different explanations and non-explanations for what you're seeing all coexist in a way that is very magical. The host of the dinner says, "And now Mr. McCay will show us what he thinks a dinosaurus looked like in real life." As the gentlemen go on talking and laughing without paying much attention to McCay, McCay gets up and draws a dinosaur on the screen. When he's finished, one of the men says, "McCay, your bet was that you could make it move." Acknowledging this, McCay rips the drawing of the dinosaur off the screen to reveal a scene of a rocky, presumably prehistoric cave. You don't even necessarily see that it's a cave, but some sort of rocky space that's next to a body of water and a tree. We have our scene. He draws the dinosaur's head poking out of the cave. He points to it and says, "Gertie, yes, her name is Gertie, will come out of that cave and do everything I tell her to do." He steps out of the way and says, "Come out, Gertie, and make a pretty bow." Suddenly, Gertie is moving. She's sort of shaking her head as if to suggest she's not going to come out, but she's also moving back and forth at the same time, sort of inching her way out of the cave. It's clearly repeating the same drawings forwards and backwards to keep her moving without needing quite so many drawings. Again, this is the first moment when people are really seeing this principle of cycling in action that's going to keep that's going to make animation possible in television, is what it's going to do decades later. The effect is that I'm not really sure if we're supposed to think she's actually saying no to McCay or if she's just a little bit shy. In either case, it's kind of odd just because the whole background is moving as well. It's not supposed to be, but there is this... I think I've seen it described as a shimmering effect, but I like to think of it as a shimmying effect. The whole background is kind of dancing just a little. It's got the jitters because it was traced over each and every time.
Yeah. I like to think of it at least in terms of, when you think of bad, maybe that's harsh, but I'll continue the thought. Bad camera work where you don't have a tripod there, you're a handheld camera, you're going to get the wiggles if you don't have a steady hand.
Right. What I think makes all of this acceptable to the eye is that in this time with film projection technology being what it was, and possibly just filmmaking technology being what it was, I think people were used to a certain amount of shaking in the image. Like you get that in this anyway, even in the live action sections, that it's all kind of shaking around a little bit. And so you don't really notice that. You mostly notice the big intentional movements, which are all coming from Gertie. And yet, even with that, she's still able to give a performance that is, in some ways, that sometimes kind of a little subtle, sort of. It's very performative, but still. So Gertie finally leaps out of the cave and walks toward us. Just as we're getting used to seeing Gertie walk, a sea monster slithers up out of the water and just as quickly goes back under. It is visible for a total of 3 seconds. It's like you're just getting used to, oh, look, it's a dinosaur. Wow, what's that? And it's gone. Like all at once. It happens so fast. And immediately, Gertie picks up a big rock with her mouth and swallows it. It travels down her neck in much the same way that a sandwich is swallowed by Scooby-Doo and Shaggy. Just way too large for that neck, but it's a sight to behold. Just one right after another, trick after trick, in a time when no one had seen anything quite like this. For what it's worth, swallowing rocks, which, like, I had initially clocked that as, like, why would the dinosaur swallow a rock? But it is not actually that out of the ordinary for animals, or even for dinosaurs specifically, particularly the herbivorous sauropods, I think is how you say this, which that appears to be the sort of dinosaur that Gertie is. She's an herbivore. A herbivore? Oh, I'm not going to have this trouble with H's again, am I? So these rocks are called gastroliths, which just mean stomach stones. Basically, when birds and reptiles do this today, they swallow sharp stones that help grind up the food in their stomachs to help with digestion. These stones are quite small in relation to the size of the animal, and once the stones have been smoothed out by rubbing up against each other, they get vomited out, not digested. Given all this information, and given the big round boulder that Gertie swallows, I suspect that Winsor McCay had read about the first part. Next, Gertie bites the tree trunk and breaks off the majority of the tree and proceeds to rapidly scarf it all down. To celebrate eating, she does a little dance. It's simple but very charming to everyone except Winsor McCay, who yells, "Aw, stop that!" Gertie eventually acquiesces. We are now establishing an essential part of the vaudeville act, that McCay can interact with Gertie and vice versa in real time. It's very much the theme parky part of the show. When a character in the room with you starts interacting with a character on the screen, classic gimmick, love to see it. This is cinema. Okay.
Yeah. This must have been mind-blowing to be an audience member back in the day. If you were at one of the shows where Winsor McCay is giving this performance, and again, in the context of animation being this new medium, you might not quite understand it, but you're seeing this creature move and seemingly obey commands by this person on stage in front of you. It's hard to envision, but it must have just been so mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think that there would still be a magic to that for me now, even as someone who has seen this sort of thing done in theme parks, of here's like an animated character, definitely something that is not physically real, that appears to be interacting in real time with real people. That truly, I think, never gets old. To see it done for the sort of the first time in this way. Again, there were the Chalk Talks, there were similar things to this pioneered particularly by J. Stuart Blackton, even before he did Humorous Phases, that are a similar thing where like somehow he has this act where he like draws people and like he would draw a glass on top of someone's head and then he would pick up the glass and drink from it. And I can't figure out how he did that. Like, I still don't know exactly that now how that worked. So something about the interactions between the real and the unreal has a power to it today that I have to imagine was just exponentially more powerful back then. McCay says, "Be a good girl and bow to the audience." Gertie takes a few bows in different directions. And that, I'm going to say, is the most important part of the movie.
Yeah?
Here's what I mean. So what stands out to me is that McCay doesn't say, "Bow to my dinner guests." No, he says the audience. Like, we have fully exited and negated the reality of the framing device and are now in the reality of the vaudeville act. Gertie is now performing for us, the implied audience in the theater, not for the men at the dinner. And you can tell from the way she moves. She doesn't just bow to the side where the gentlemen are in the dining room, which would be stage right, house left. She also bows to the center and to house right. That's not for the gentlemen. There's nobody there. That's for the movie house. Given that the animation seems to be cycled here, I think it would have been fairly easy to remove the bow to house right, in as much as any editing was easy back then. But they've cut out pieces of this clearly, and so they could just, she bows to the left, she maybe bows to the center, and then it's done, and they've achieved it. The fact that they keep in that third bow to no one but us, that's been left intact from the vaudeville act. That seems significant to me. I think it means that Gertie is giving a performance for the screen and a performance through the screen with an awareness that we are her real audience. And in that, this film establishes a few features of cartoon shorts and cartoon characters that were novel at the time, but would later become generally understood and accepted. If you take anything away from this episode, folks, let it be these 4 points, all of them standards in animation established by Winsor McCay and Gertie the Dinosaur. Number 1, a cartoon star has a clear and distinct personality that comes from the combination of its design, its expressions, and, perhaps especially, its movement. Animation historian Charles Solomon sums up Gertie's contribution to the art this way, quote, "In this film, McCay laid the foundations of character animation, the art of delineating a character's personality through a unique style of movement. The endearing, somewhat childish personality of the dinosaur is communicated through her motions, the angle at which she cocks her head while listening to a command, the impudence with which she flicks her tail while disobeying it." End quote. Number 2. To that end, a cartoon should have a believable physicality to its movement. Number 3, a cartoon short has a flimsy fourth wall that is made to be broken. See, for example, Looney Tunes. And number 4, a cartoon star is a performer. All of those are going to be pretty important to the medium of animation when it flourishes in the sound era, and all of them are demonstrated perfectly here. In particular, I'd like to draw attention to that last point. Gertie's job is performing for you. She's a vaudeville performer. The cartoon stars that emerge in later shorts exist in much more fleshed out universes than the one that we're seeing here, that typically, it feels like a little stage here, and it feels less like a little stage in those, where it's more of a whole closed world, but those characters are still framed as actors. They work for cartoon studios. It's their job. It's what they put on their tax forms. They talk to us. That's something cartoons can get away with a lot more than live action people. And I think it's safe to say that it plays a very big part in why so many classic cartoon characters have endured as much as they have to the present day. Anything to add to that? That's my little rant about this.
That was extremely well said, and I don't think I could add anything more to that.
Well, thank you. This episode exists just mostly for me to lay out those points, I think. After Gertie finishes, McCay says, "Thanks. Now raise your right foot." Gertie dances a little more, which I think we're supposed to think is happening as McCay is still giving the command. Because then she lifts her right foot. That's the other thing about watching this as a silent film, is you have to sort of mentally map out the timing of when are we supposed to be hearing these words spoken.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating that the whole act revolves around timing, like really precise timing. That is its trick. And we don't have the timing here. The whole timing it just doesn't exist anymore. It's not possible to replicate exactly.
Even the recreations, like the Disney one, with the voiceover, it does add so much, because it's probably not the exact timing, and a lot of those ones, they cut out quite a bit of the animation, or they speed things up a bit. but it's still like I think those are worth watching because they do like help sell that illusion that this is a real thing happening, and yeah, that is the timing of the commands versus what Gertie's actually showing on screen feels more connected.
Yeah, it's also weird, come to think of it, that I am showing what is mostly a live action film. I say showing, not really showing, but I'm covering what is mostly a live action film with an animated segment in a way in a podcast about cartoon shorts. But it is because originally this was presented as an animated film on its own without being interrupted by titles or having live action sections. It's just that there was a whole other piece around it going with it on a stage.
Well, and that's also just a lot of that early animation where there were always these live action segments to it, mixed in with the animation. Like the Out of the Inkwell series, you'd have the introductions like starting with the artist drawing.
Right. You can easily, here's a pun for you if you like it, you can easily draw a straight line from what Winsor McCay is doing with this film, including the framing device, to what Dave and Max Fleischer are doing in the Out of the Inkwell shorts. Easily. It's a short line where those films are built around, here's a cartoonist in his cartoon studio, and now you're going to see his character come to life. It is such a close copy of the gimmick of specifically this film, and that's why, in a way, the film is worth covering, not just the animated portion of it, I think. Like, you kind of have to talk about all of the versions of Gertie the Dinosaur, except Bray's, which can get out of here. I also just want to circle back to this movement that really got my attention. The fact that she's just moving back and forth the whole time. Like, she kind of just doesn't stop rocking back and forth. And I do think part of that is the convenience of cycling the animation. And part of that is keeping her alive. Because again, if she goes still, then it doesn't work. Then she's not alive. Like, it has to keep moving to be alive. And this connects to some of my limited puppetry experience. Where if you stop moving the puppet, it stops being alive. That's not an issue with real people, generally speaking. You can tell from subtle, teeny tiny micro movements that we don't even mean to make, generally speaking, when a person is alive, at least if you're up close to them. And yet with puppets and cartoons, like, the brain registers something as just an object if it's not constantly moving at least a little bit. And has to be moving more than the moving background of this film. In the case of puppetry, it's like when you have those characters who are not speaking in a scene and they just have to be listening to someone else speak, there's all this training that puppeteers have to get in how to make it look like the characters are still thinking as they're still in a scene. And so you have to have those little movements. I think Peter Linz has talked about how he has to go against those instincts that he was trained in and that he has trained so many other people in when he is playing Ernie, because when he watches the way that Jim played Ernie in the old sketches, there are moments when once Ernie has like wound Bert up, Ernie just gets very still and watches without moving. And that non-movement has to be like a bold creative choice that sort of disrupts everything else that you're used to in the logic of Muppet performance. And you'll see Frank Oz do that a lot with his characters, just the stillness that creates a really powerful stare because the stillness is so out of the ordinary for the way the puppetry usually works. I think animation is a pretty similar thing where these things start to look cheap when you get into the TV era, where sometimes the characters are just still if they're not speaking. And so part of me is like, well, that's why Gertie has to just kind of keep moving and dancing and rocking back and forth the whole time, even when there are no commands given or when she's not immediately responding. But the other part of it that I thought of just recently, like when I was watching it again to take more specific notes, it's all timed. Like, the benefit of it being cycled is she's always going, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And if you're doing an act in which you have to make it look, you have to say your lines at just the right time, that what the film does looks like a spontaneous reaction to it, you need to know exactly when she's going to respond without the audience knowing. And so I have a hunch that he was actually counting the number of steps that she made and was able to use that count like beats of music, basically, possibly even synchronizing with a musician in the theater, since they would have probably had some musical accompaniment. Maybe not, actually, for the vaudeville act. I don't know. But, like, there was some way for him to sort of use the cycled animation, I think, to time out the way that he did his act.
That would make a lot of sense. And I would also argue, too, that there's probably... It's a nice bit of character to give to Gertie. And it kind of makes her a bit more believable as a trained animal, because you kind of see this behavior sometimes in zoo animals where they're pacing or they're shuffling, and she's waiting for a command, but she's maybe a little agitated. You know, as we're going to see, it seems like she's slightly antagonistic towards McCay. Yeah, some of that slight agitation, I think it works really well to convey her as not just a series of drawings, but a real thinking creature.
Right, yeah. So let's unpack that. This is like the perfect time to get into precisely that point. So he says, that's good, now raise your left foot. And this time Gertie doesn't really obey, and instead kicks up some dirt with her right foot, not her left foot, and then gets distracted by the sea monster that just popped up again. And he goes, never mind, that's sea serpent. Gertie, raise your left foot. Gertie ignores his order and keeps doing her little dance before snapping at the audience, but perhaps I suspect in the direction of where McCay would have been standing in the vaudeville act, probably.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So let me ramble for a little bit about why this part is really significant too.
Okay.
The fact that Gertie can obey commands is crucial. Like the fact that she's responding to a human gives her more reality than any drawn character had ever had before, because it brings her into our world of like causes and effects in linear time, which drawings had not really existed in before, I would say. And it's also an impressive trick when performed on stage, because McCay has to keep his act precisely synchronized, as I just said. That's all very impressive. But when you think about it, the trick that is being advertised to us, the dinosaur that can obey commands, is not the real trick. It's just the setup for the truly impressive feat. The real trick is that she can disobey commands. When she doesn't do what he tells her to do, it doesn't mean that his act has failed, or that he botched the timing, or that this whole animation experiment doesn't work, which one easily could think, right? Like what someone could think at the time. Like if McCay gives the order for something to happen, and then it doesn't, in theory, his act hasn't worked. It is a failure. But like, it's just the in-universe act that's like 3 levels deep into this, basically. It's just what he is fictionally trying to do doesn't work, but that actually proves that what he's actually trying to do has worked incredibly effectively. Because instead, we don't believe that something has really gone wrong. We just believe that Gertie has her own intentions. It gets back to exactly what you've talked about on this show before and today that I think is so crucial. She has her own life because she has her own mind, which is not only very girl boss of her, but more pertinently, it shows that animation's mission is not merely to draw moving pictures. It is to draw characters to life and create a kind of personhood. And I think, for what it's worth, that focus on personification is a choice. I would say it is not a necessary feature of the medium. Animation didn't have to be this. It could have been called something else and focused on replicating through moving drawings and paintings things like ocean waves, falling leaves, wind blowing through a field, and so on and so forth. Like, it didn't have to be, this is about creating people. But the thing is, we're humans. We like faces, especially humorous faces, or funny faces going through humorous phases. We like us. We like people. Even when we're sick and tired of people, as I know I am, we still like people. We like us. We want to see us. That's what interests us. So when presented with the possibility that we could create another kind of humanity out of drawings of extinct animals, that's what we latched onto. And just animals generally. This is what we latched onto for this medium for decades and through to today. It's, what if we could create through drawings an animal that's a person? Turns out humans love that. We think it's great. And it is. Yeah. I agree with the rest of our species and with how our brains work on this point. I think it's good. So circling back to Gertie's disobedience, this idea of tension between the cartoon character and its creator lays the groundwork for Duck Amuck, the great Daffy Duck cartoon.
Yes.
Only here, the fun comes from the character successfully defying the creator. That's kind of the part that we think is neat and that we're rooting for here. Whereas in Duck Amuck, the fun comes from the creator tormenting a character who is trying to be compliant. It doesn't work out. In both cases, the fact that these characters are just drawings in a film is circled and underlined for us. They're making a point of it, but it somehow doesn't detract from the believability of the characters one bit. That's the magic of animation, right? Again, it goes back to, we're going to tell you and show you exactly how this is done, remind you that it is fake, and that will make you believe in it even more. McCay is not as impressed with Gertie's determination as we are, Kristi, I'm sorry to say. He says, "You're a bad girl. Shame on you." Gertie begins sobbing.
Just weeping.
He becomes the villain of this the moment she starts crying.
Yeah. I would love to hear the audience reaction to this, because I picture, well, at least I would hope, as some sympathy for our poor girl, Gertie.
Yeah, I think so. You can't help but be sympathetic unless you're Winsor McCay. Mm-hmm. He says, "Oh, don't cry. Here, catch this pumpkin." She gladly opens her mouth and catches the pumpkin that McCay threw her. "Now will you raise your right foot?" She nods, raises her right foot, and eats the rest of the tree. Gertie starts looking off to the side where another creature walks on screen, a woolly mammoth. You're getting so much more than was advertised here. Think about it. All the advertisements were just like, it's a dinosaur. And then you're getting 3 other species in this.
What's Jumbo's opinion on autos? Does he like them?
Well, Gertie and Jumbo have a long-standing disagreement about autos, which explains everything that's about to happen to Jumbo.
That would.
So Gertie reacts with either fear or confusion, maybe both, as she gets on her hind legs and looks all around at the sight of this mammoth. She kind of waves at it, but she's noticeably bothered when it turns toward her and gets up in her space. McCay calls out, "Gertie, don't hurt Jumbo." As Jumbo starts to leave, Gertie grabs him by the tail, flings him into the air, and sends him hurtling back into the water behind her. She proudly gets up on her hind legs, dances for us. She's so happy with herself.
I love that part so much. Her little victory dance afterwards. Oh.
But also, the fact that a woolly mammoth is a toy to her is so interesting.
Yes.
That's also part of this, is that after he is just focused on a mosquito, something very tiny, to play with, what if a gigantic thing was a moving person, is kind of new to humanity in terms of things that you can see now, thanks to the wonders of technology.
Yeah. I love to, by giving Jumbo a name, McCay kind of, he already makes you think that Jumbo must be a reoccurring character in Gertie's universe. Are they angry neighbors? There's some kind of territorial beef here, and the quickness that Gertie takes in just hucking him over her shoulder. There is no hesitation, no remorse for that. Again, there is some kind of history between Gertie and Jumbo here, and it's never explained, and I love it.
I do too. I specifically like that Winsor knows the name of the woolly mammoth. At this point, he has been in the trenches of making this dang cartoon for such a long time that he knows everyone in this universe personally, including characters like Jumbo, who almost seem like they're not even supposed to be in the film in a way.
Yes.
It's such a striking interruption.
It definitely, now that you say that, it does have that vibe of somebody setting up a camera in a field and they're just trying to film their pet doing tricks for the camera, and whatever happens in the background happens. And as you said, Jumbo just wanders in, nearly ruins the shot until Gertie steps in.
Yeah, I think you make a good point that it feels like these are both Winsor McCay's pets. And I think that the animosity between them feels very much like the cat that has lived in the house for a long time picking on the new kitten. You get some of that dynamic, and Gertie becomes only more of a pet as this goes on. I would say. But now he's going to say, Gertie loves music. Play for her and she'll dance, which she's been doing the whole time. But she dances with bigger and bigger gestures here and smiles for us. Then she turns and notices Jumbo in the water, who promptly sprays her in the face.
Yes.
It's an impressive spray effect.
This is beautiful, a beautiful effect, and you can track Gertie's movements as she is being sprayed by this water, by the direction of it and the energy of it. It's just gorgeous.
You feel the force of it, too. That's the impressive thing. And this is where I can only wonder, like, in the stage act, did they squirt some water at the audience? Like, there's so much you can do here. It's it feels like cheap 3D tricks in the best sense of the term. Just lovely. But that's also part of the feat here. Is like, not only has he brought all these animals to life, he's also figured out how to make water move in a way that you kind of believe in. Even
earlier when Gertie is pulling up the tree to eat, you see the particle effects as the dirt is crumbling from the roots.
Yeah, there's too much here that's impressive. Much impressive stuff. Like, the animation is such a short section of the film overall, and yet he packs so much into it. That's just, well, that would be an impressive landmark on its own, actually. So she retaliates by picking up a boulder and throwing it at him. I can't quite tell if it hits or not, but she comes very close, even though the distance is very far and Jumbo is a moving target. I like that she loses her grip on the boulder at first.
I was going to mention something about this because I can't remember where I first saw somebody discussing this. For some reason, I want to think it was maybe a Studio Ghibli thing. I'm not 100% on that. So if you know, let me know. But that idea of animating an imperfect movement like that, where she tries to pick up the stone, but then it drops and she has to pick it up again. That's something that feels so human, because that is just something that naturally happens to us as we're doing something. You have to change your grip. You maybe lose your grip on something. But in animation, that's something that you, as the animator, have to deliberately decide to do and to animate it. And it's something that when you're a beginning animator, you might not think about that. You're just focused on trying to complete a movement successfully and have it look halfway decent. So this feels like the mark of a true professional is being able to make a mistake look intentional.
The fact that there is a mistake in the movement that is not a mistake in the animation adds so much to the believability, and it's even think of doing that is really remarkable. And then Gertie lies down on the ground and breathing heavily, wagging her tail. Gertie is a real dog. She looks up to see what appears to be a dragon flying through the sky, but with 4 wings. So McCay says, "Did you see that 4-winged lizard?" Gertie nods. "Sure." She nods again. "Are you in the habit of seeing things?" She shakes her head. "Are you fibbing to me?" She shakes her head. And that's the end of that gag, which went nowhere. Like, just like, it's all real. There's just needless Gertie gaslighting going on here. I don't know why.
So apparently McCay had consulted with the New York Museum staff. This is from Wikipedia. And he was trying to ensure that Gertie's movements would be accurate, which, hard task to accomplish with her being an extinct dinosaur.
But also, how many people can fact check you on that?
Yeah.
I mean, but the museum staff can.
Yes. But one thing that they weren't able to help him figure out was how would this dinosaur stand up from a lying position. So apparently this was his solution, is that this flying lizard is meant to distract the viewer's eye so that you're not looking at Gertie when she stands up. You're looking at this flying dragon flying through the sky. And what's funny is that knowing that, if you look at Gertie getting up, I mean, I think she looks fine. I think she looks great. I mean, if anything, this is like a nice little moment, I think, just knowing that even the great Winsor McCay was a little self-conscious about his animation. Like, thank God he's human. He's not just some wizard who made all this happen. He does have some humanity in him.
Yeah, but does that mean that he would really harshly judge everyone else's animation if he can do something that incredible and still think it's rough? Oof. But you know, I like that there is just some simple magic trick misdirection going on. Again, it's a magic act, and it's a comedy act, and it's an animal act, and it's a cartoonist's chalk talk, and it's cinema. Everything is happening at once, and it's good. So McCay says, "Will you have a little drink?" Gertie nods. "There's a lake. Take a little drink if you want it." Now, Kristi, you might not know this, but here in the U.S., this is how we all respond when a state is experiencing a drought. It's just basic etiquette to be like, "There's a lake, take a drink if you want it." That's what we do here. We're evil. Gertie starts drinking water, and that was all a lie. Another attempt at some political commentary here on Stick to Shorts. That's what you get in your in a top-notch, high-quality cartoons podcast. Gertie starts drinking water and keeps leaning further forward until the ground under her front legs crumbles. But before she can totally fall into the water, like we'd all kind of like to see, no offense to Gertie, who should walk into the cartoon but Winsor McCay, now a cartoon character. Thoughts?
Again, this is another moment I wish I could be in the audience and witness this moment of McCay walking off stage and then on stage onto the film.
Yeah, I keep wondering, could it be half as magical as I'd like to think? Because I do feel like he gets so tiny. Like, I don't know how big the projection screen is. Maybe they only projected it on very big screens. It's hard for me to believe that this would have totally worked, but I still think it's a good gimmick and you love to see it. It does not work in this film. Like, it doesn't fit with the framing device. I think it makes the last part of this movie just not really make any sense. But I'm glad that it's here, and I think it is good. Love to see it. He's holding a whip. Hate to see it. Hate to see that.
You understand a bit more why Gertie snapped at him earlier.
Yeah, she's justified. Gertie will now show that she isn't afraid of me and take me for a ride. So she signs him up for a multi-level marketing scheme. No. She just puts him on her back and walks away. Cut to paying the bet. Winsor McCay and George McManus shake hands. The man at the head of the table stands and is perhaps the one who says, we don't really know who is saying these words. I gotta pick a voice for this character now. Who pays for the dinner? Let George do it. Which feels like it should have been two different lines from two different characters, but it's written all as one. The server brings McManus the check, and the final title card reads, "And George did." And all the cartoonists raise a toast to Winsor McCay, the end. Mm-hmm. So that's Gertie the Dinosaur in all of its forms and in all of its glory. And then it changed how animation was made, as all the cartoonists looked to that and were like, yeah, let's figure out how to make a character as lovable as Gertie.
Yeah.
Because she really is lovable.
How can you not be inspired by Gertie?
Yeah, certainly one John Randolph Bray would agree with you. How can you not be inspired by Gertie?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
You mentioned my podcast earlier, the Bad Princess Movie podcast, and part of that podcast is, or a staple of that podcast is taking a look at mockbusters of better-known animated films.
Yes.
So it is delightful to know that even in its earliest beginnings in animation, we had animation mockbusters.
Yep, absolutely. But and yes, I think you get why. But also, after this, McCay turns to other interesting projects himself. Like, you brought to my attention the sinking of the Lusitania. I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced, which I had not seen before. But it's this fascinating film that McCay did a few years later that is sort of a propaganda film. It's sort of a documentary. It's basically McCay responding to an actual event that happened sort of before the U.S. was willing to get involved in World War I, where a German submarine sank a ship that had a lot of people on it, some number of which were Americans. And McCay is outraged and wants the U.S. to react. His employer, noted villain William Randolph Hearst, is not interested in the U.S. getting involved in the war, and so he's not able to express this through his newspaper comics, so he takes, like, years, I think it is. He takes, like, a very long time to craft an animated film that is designed to be a document of, here is a visual of the sinking of this ship, because there wasn't any film footage of it. So he had to create it. And that means carefully trying to capture what humans look like, what the ocean looks like, what a ship looks like on the ocean after it's been hit and as it's sinking. And then try to use what evidence there was of, like, how the ship would have tipped when it sank and how that would have affected the people getting off. And you're not getting any of this character study that you have with Gertie the Dinosaur. It is just capturing an event, but it's still really compelling, really impressive, and is the sort of thing that nobody else in the medium was going to be trying to do at the time. Do you have thoughts on this film or any others by Winsor McCay?
I mean, yeah, Sinking to the Lusitania, that it's been a while since I've seen that one, but the ending of it really sticks out visually, because if I recall right, it ends on the shot of a mother as she is sinking into the sea, and she tries to, lift her baby up above the water, but as you imagine, there is no hope for them. They are both going to drown, but it's in this desperation, just a mother trying to do what she can to save her baby. And to end the film like that, like, it is such a impactful call to action.
Yeah, I think this is the sort of thing that can happen in a time when animation isn't all made by studios, like when artists are free to just do the work that's important to them. McCay really cared about the art form, so he was eager to explore all the different things that it could do. He was experimenting with color right from the beginning. His Little Nemo film from 1911 had color.
Which, remember right, I think he hand painted that color.
Yeah, that was long before any modern process for color film existed, so it would have to have been added to the film manually. What's critical here is McCay's sincere passion for the art form. He wasn't in it for the money, and he really resisted the industrialization of animation. There's a story at the very beginning of Leonard Maltin's book of Mice and Magic about Winsor McCay from some years later. A group of animators who saw McCay as their mentor held a dinner in his honor, and when he made his speech, he chastised them, saying, "Animation should be an art. That is how I had conceived it, but what you fellows have done with it is make it into a trade. Not an art, but a trade." There's a sad irony to it, given the extent to which McCay had influenced the early animators, which is a lot. As Leonard Maltin put it, quote, "One might say that Gertie launched an entire industry." End quote. The events that follow Gertie in animation history are developments in making a factory-like production process for animated cartoons, new practices that McCay would have liked to stay open to the public, but were instead patented and profited from. Some of these developments were highly creative inventions, such as Max Fleischer's rotoscope, but I think it's safe to say that McCay's work remained an unbeatable standard for artistry in animation for quite some time. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, Kristi, on Winsor McCay, the silent era, Gertie the Dinosaur? You're shaking your head. You're shaking your head.
You know what? I again, I mentioned it earlier, but just the equal parts admiration and jealousy I feel of the work that Winsor McCay was able to create, and also just how, you kind of touched on it earlier, but this wasn't a money-making scheme for him. He had no interest in making a studio or becoming a studio and to start to churn out these shorts to try and get him some money. He animated.
Bray went into it because he thought it would make money.
Yes. But Winsor McCay just did this because he just wanted to create. He loved animation, as tedious and as miserable as animation could be sometimes. He loved doing it. And that's so admirable. And I'm so glad that as a lot of films from that early period in Hollywood film history, they are lost to time. I'm very glad that we have Gertie with us still.
Me too. And in fact, what's really neat is I saw Gertie in person a few months ago.
Oh, yeah?
She's still with us in real life in some sense. by which I mean, if you go to Disney's Hollywood Studios, one of the theme parks in Walt Disney World, they have built pretty much to scale, maybe not quite as big as this Gertie, but pretty much to scale, Gertie the Dinosaur. Or at least they call her Gertie. She looks a little bit different, but she's clearly supposed to be... She actually, I think, maybe looks a little bit more like Braze. But she's clearly... she's supposed to be Gertie the Dinosaur. They all call her Gertie, and that is the point, is because that park is, at least originally, was a testament to the history of Hollywood and movie making. They wanted to have something to represent the early years of animation and where everything that the Disney studio was trying to do really started. And so they have... this giant, it's a statue, it's not moving or anything, but it's a giant Gertie that you can get a picture with. And also it's big enough that the body of Gertie, which is standing in a lake, by the way, I guess she eventually did fall in after drinking the water. The body of Gertie is up against the land, so you can walk up to it, and it is in fact a shop, like a little ice cream shop. Because, of course, it is Disney World. And so, yes, even this tribute to the origins of cartoons as we know it is a way to make money. And Winsor McCay would be fuming. And now it's time for the epilogue. By the 1920s, American animation took the form of a studio system based in New York. Paul Terry's studio produced cartoons starring Farmer Alfalfa, the Fleischer studio produced cartoons starring Coco the Clown, and Pat Sullivan's studio produced cartoons starring Felix the Cat, just to name a few highlights. From what I can tell, Felix the Cat became the most popular star in the silent era. His animator, Otto Mesmer, had worked on cartoons based on Charlie Chaplin and had learned how to emulate Chaplin's distinct walk in animation. Mesmer gave Felix a walk with a similar effect, imbuing him with a distinct personality through his movement, a first for studio-produced cartoons. However, the business might not have gone any further than the simplistically spunky Felix if it hadn't gotten competition from a whole new crop of animators that weren't from New York and weren't part of its studio system. We'll meet the upstart animators of Kansas City when we return. Folks, it's about time for us to say so long, but before we do, we'll let you know where you can find us. Kristi, where can the people go to find you, your work, or anything you'd like to plug?
I am currently on Blue Sky, Instagram, Tumblr, some other places, but those are the main ones that I have been using. And I am there as KO Makes Things. So that's where I post my art and my Labyrinth replicas. And yes, I also co-host a podcast called the Bad Princess Movie Podcast because I am not great at coming up with names. So
I think it's pretty clear and straightforward.
Yeah, I mean...
a little bit more than the name of a certain cartoons podcast I know. I think people can tell exactly what they're in for from the title.
Oh, but come on, yours is classy.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with my title, actually.
But yes, that is a podcast where me and my friend, we take a look at movies starring princesses and princesses to be. I will say it is a much different vibe than JD's podcast because this is the podcast where I mostly get belligerent and yell about the Swan Princess series to my friend. There's a lot more swearing. There's a lot more odd tangents where we... You know, I host it with my friend of many years, so we often get sidetracked talking about just like the worst stuff sometimes. Cartoons we used to watch that are completely unrelated, theme parks.
Good.
But we have fun, so hopefully people have fun listening.
Wonderful. You'll find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd at JD11PC. You can find this show on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook by searching for Stick to Shorts. That's where you can see what cartoons are coming up next, where you can find them, and what content you should be aware of so you know what you're getting yourself into. If you'd like to support this show, you'll find a link to my Ko-Fi at sticktoshorts.com. Please be sure to give us a rating and review in your podcast app of choice and tell all your cartoon fan friends to listen so more people can find us. Next time on Stick to Shorts, we'll meet the man who changed animation more than just about anybody else, Walt Disney. We might talk a little bit about the early Laugh-O-Grams and Alice comedies, but we're primarily shining the spotlight on Walt's first popular cartoon star, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. We'll be watching Oswald's public debut, 1927's Trolley Troubles, when we return. Until then, please remember, the next time you try to bet against Winsor McCay, stick to shorts.